Okay, so the end of chapter 39 is about behavior. And so notice here we're starting out in the third section of that. So we're going to look at some behaviors and how it relates to ecology. So we call this behavioral ecology. It's a study of the ecological and evolutionary basis for animal behavior. It integrates, it's called proximate, which is the how, and ultimate, which is the why explanation. So how animals behave the way that they do and why they do. So a lot of responses are due to environmental clues. So in animals, internal and external signals regulate a variety of physiological responses that synchronize with environmental cycles and cues. So an example would be behavioral rhythms. Some behaviors in animals are affected by the animal's, what's called the animal's circadian rhythm. A daily cycle of rest and activity. So the rhythm persists in constant conditions, even in constant darkness, with a period of about 24 hours. So no matter what, even if you're not getting external signals, you have this rhythm. So we have a 24-hour rhythm. And we see that, you see when that is kind of messed up when you go to some place on a different time zone. Like we're on our rhythm here in the Eastern Standard Time Zone. And so if you go somewhere that's 10-hour difference, there's a different rhythm there, meaning that it's daylight at different times and nighttime at different times. And so therefore you have to be awake and sleep at different times than you're used to with your circadian rhythm. And so therefore you experience this thing called jet lag because your body is used to this circadian rhythm. Now, staying in one area for a longer period of time, you can overcome and change that circadian rhythm to that new time zone or whatever, but that's what that is. And so behaviors in animals like migration and reproduction can be linked to changing seasons. So you can have seasonal changes, and I'll talk about those in just a second. But daylight, I use the example of daylight and darkness. Daylight and darkness are common seasonal cues, not just daily cues, but seasonal cues to help with maybe migration patterns and so on. So another example is plants' response to light. In the late 1800s, Charles Darwin, and this is the same Darwin with evolution, and his son Francis conducted experiments on what is called phototropism, a plant's response to light. All right, they observed that a seedling could bend towards the light, and you've probably maybe have observe this with plants as well. The plants grow towards the light. But he noticed that only if the tip of the coleoptile, this is a very young plant, so the young plant was present. They postulated that a signal was transmitted from the tip to the elongating region. So I'm looking at this picture here. You have, this is the coleoptile, and it's bending towards the light. So here's the light. And so we blow this up and we look at the cells. Over here, these are the cells that are, notice that they're elongated cells, so they have grown longer, all right? And these guys have not, so these are non-elongated. Also, the shading is supposed to be showing you that these guys are in the light. It's on the light side. And these guys are in the dark or on the dark side. All right, and so therefore the ones with the light don't elongate, the ones that in the dark do. So what if we have one side growing and the other side doesn't, what you end up is this side grows more, and therefore you get the bending, all right, towards the light, because it's the non-light side that is actually elongating. All right, so then to prove what's causing this to happen, he did a little experiment. All right, and so what he did, here's the light source. So here's the light again. He took the coleoptile and he removed the tip. So in this one here, the tip is removed. In this one, he put a cap. All right, so this one, the tip is covered by an opaque cap. That's that one. This one, the tip is covered by a transparent cap. And this one here, the site of the curvature is covered. By an opaque shield. So look at here, you cut off the tip, nothing happens, no bending. So it tells you that probably the tip has something to do with it, with the bending. If we look at the next picture, opaque cap, which opaque means it's blocking the light. So the light's not getting it. So not only is the presence of the tip, but the light has something to do with it. You put a transparent cap so the light can get through and you get the bending again, and you cover the bent part and it still bends, so again telling you that it's not the site of where the bending is occurring, that it's the tip part here. So something going on with the light and the tip is causing the bending. So then later on, some other scientists, Boyce and Jensen, demonstrated that the signal was actually a chemical substance, a mobile, moving chemical substance. So what he did here is this right here, that he cut off the tip and separated it from the rest of it by a gelatin, permeable gelatin. So tip separated by gelatin, which is permeable. This is the tip separated by mica. Mica is impermeable. So he thought that there was a mobile chemical substance that's produced by the tip. So what he was thinking is, if this is permeable, that chemical substance can go through the gelatin and cause the bending, which is what happened. And impermeable, if the tip produces a chemical that needs to communicate, like hormones, to the rest of to cause the bending, it won't go through there, and that's what you see there. All right, so then in 1926, Went extracted the chemical substance causing this to happen, so they actually isolated it and named it Oxen. All right, and Oxen, come to find out, is a plant hormone. So remember, animal hormones are produced in one part of the body and travel to another part of the body to induce a change to happen, and so that is the case here. So Oxen is a plant hormone. So the plant hormone Oxen, what they did next is, so he said, okay, if this tip is producing this hormone, we're gonna cut off the tip and put it on an agar cube, kind of like the agar that we use to grow bacteria. All right, so that's the tip. All right, so tip on agar cube. All right, and then what they allowed is the hormone then that the that promotes growth promoting hormone diffuses into the agar cube. All right, and then what we have here is, let's do a color coding here. I'm going to pick pink here. So this has the hormone in it. All right, so then what happens is that hormone diffuses into the cube. All right, so that's what we have here. All right, and I'll put like kind of stripes here showing that it's a lighter color pink now, the tip, because some of that hormone is now in the agar cube. All right, so then they had a control group. So they cut off the tip and didn't do anything. All right, so this one right here is the control. Meaning didn't put the agar cube on it. Here, they put here an agar cube with no hormone to see what changes just the agar cube would make and to prove that it is the actual hormone. Then, that's where the arrow here shows down here, they put the agar cube with the hormone on it, and it stayed, and then with the idea that the hormone is going to move down into the tip, or into the stem, and nothing happened. All right, it stayed straight. And so it continued to grow. It grew, but didn't bend. And so then what they did over here is they offset the cube. All right, so they offset the cube on one side of the tip. So what we're supposed to see is there's part of the tip that doesn't have the agar cube on it. And then they did it on the other side where they put the agar cube on the other side. And what you need to see here is that there's part of the tip that's the coleoptile that's sticking out here that doesn't get it. So these two right here, we can say have offset cubes. And these caused curvature. This is the full agar cube. This is the agar cube with the hormone. And didn't. When it's evenly set, and then nothing happened. So what this showed is that the hormone, if we look here, the hormone is on, let's put down here, hormone goes down this side. Hormone goes down this side, all right, and causes the elongation, which causes the bending. So that's going back over here, back to this picture, where when it bends towards the light, the elongated side, the cells elongate, and these cells don't, so they elongate and they bend. What causes that is it's caused by that hormone Oxen. Caused by Oxen released from the tip. On the dark side. Right? And so that's what we see here. So even though there's not a light or dark side, the dark side will produce the hormone, go down the stem, elongate the cells, and cause the curvature. And so it bends towards the light. There's lots of different tropisms for plants. This is phototropism, with photo meaning light. There's gravitropism. Gravitropism is it'll grow, the roots will grow towards gravity. So if you, and the stem won't. So if you have an upright plant, you know, the roots will grow this way. All right, and the stem will grow this way. So the stem grows up away from gravity and the roots grow down. If you were to put it sideways like this, all right, eventually what would happen is it would grow like this, and the stem would go up and the roots would go down like that. All right, that's another type of tropism. All right, so environmental cues playing a role in the kind of behavior of the plant. All right, so it happens with plants and animals. So behavioral response to environmental clues. Behaviors in animals are triggered also by environmental cues and are vital to reproduction, different types of natural selection, and survival. So let's go on an example of migration. So environmental cues can trigger movement in a particular direction. So migrating south for the winter, birds migrating south for the winter. So migration is a regular long distance change in location. So it's regular, it occurs over and over and over. It's not a short distance, they move quite a long distance and have a new location. So how do they know to do that? Animals can orient themselves using several different things. They can use the position of the sun and their own circadian clock, that internal 24-hour clock that's an integral part of their nervous system that we talked about earlier. They can use the position, some organisms use the position of the North Star and where that is, and therefore will migrate in response to that. Some will do towards with the Earth's magnetic field. So let's talk about some migration cues. A photoperiod. As the seasons change, the length of the days, the amount of sunlight you get is different. So longer days in the summer or shorter days in the winter cue some animals to migrate. And also temperature, less sun usually means lower temperatures. And more sun usually means higher temperatures. So I'm going to have us look at, I'm going to put here, see photoperiod in plants pictures. And that is the one that looks like this. Okay, photoperiods in plants. And so let's look at this. Plants respond to length of the day and night as well. And so there are a group of plants called short day plants and a group of plants called long day plants. So let's look at this. It seems in terms of triggering flowers to develop in the plant and when the plant flowers is based upon seasons, and it turns out based upon the length of the night actually. And so what they found is that there in a lot of plants there's a critical dark period, and that's represented by this dotted line. And so if this is a 24-hour period of time, light represents the light, all right, daylight time, and the dark and the bar represents the amount of nighttime. And so in looking at this over a 24-hour period, if the plant, if there's not enough dark, if it doesn't reach that critical dark period, that amount of continuous dark, then there's no flowers. If it does and goes over that critical dark period, that triggers flowering. And coincidentally, what they've noticed is it's the length of the night, not the day. Even though they call these guys short day plants because they seem to flower when there's a shorter day and a longer night, it actually isn't due to the to the length of the day, because if you look at what they did with this experiment is they kept the length of the light the same, the amount of light, and they took the dark period and flashed, and just for a moment turned on the lights, and so there's a flash of light, and then turned it off so it interrupted the darkness, and guess what, it didn't flower the flowers when that happened. And so what that showed is that these are actually, we call them short day plants, but they're actually long night plants, because it's the length of the night reaching that critical dark period that triggers the plant to flower. And so there are some plants like mums. Mums are usually short day plants and they flower in the fall. And think about when the fall, what happens in the fall. The nights are starting to get longer, the days are starting to get shorter, and it triggers flowering. But oftentimes they sell mums around Mother's Day. Mother's Day is coming up here in May, and oftentimes they sell them in for Mother's Day. And how does that happen? Because they don't bloom in the springtime. They bloom in the fall when there's the longer night. And what triggers that, or what they do is in the florists, the greenhouses, keep the mums and interrupt their dark period, so it keeps them from blooming. So they hold off, and it doesn't bloom in the fall, so they keep on flashing it with light so it prevents them from blooming, and then allow them to have a longer night without the flash, and therefore that triggers them to bloom. So they can control the environment in which these organisms are living, and therefore kind of decide when the plant is going to bloom. On the other side, or on the other hand, there are also a group of plants called long day plants, and these guys are the opposite. So again, the more correct is short night. So this, if here's that critical dark period, if they don't reach that critical dark period, that triggers blooming. So you can see where somebody would think, oh, it's a long day. And so a long day plant, but it's actually the short night. So again here, looking at here, then they elongated the night over the critical period, and no flowering, because it's their short night. They're do best. The short night triggers them to flower, and so then here. They kept the day the same, but again, broke up that night with a flash of light. So it's like it had two short nights, and guess what? It bloomed. And so therefore, that's an example of a plant. They have something called phytochrome that absorbs the light and triggers the flowering and so on, in response to this photoperiod, or the length of the night in this case. And so they found also with short and long day plants is they did some study with red light and red light and far red light. So if you look here, they found that they cancel each other out. Red light works really well as the flash of light that interrupts. In far red, if you do far red and red light, one right after the other, they cancel each other out. So let's look at this. So here we have a short night, and so therefore the short night plant flowers, the long night plant doesn't. Longer night, past that critical period, short night plant or long day plant doesn't flower, and the long night does flower. All right, then kept this the same, but interrupted it with red light, a flash of red light. All right, so now it's like two short nights. All right, so look at the short night plant flowers and the long night plant doesn't. Then they did the same thing here, except right after the red light flash, they flashed far red light, and look at it cancels each other out, and this looks it's behaving as if it has that long night. And so on the long night plant flowers, but the short night plant doesn't. That's the same as up here, as if you never flashed a light. And so then you do red, then they did red, far red, and red. And notice here, it was like doing just the red by itself. So these two canceled each other out, so it's like a flash of red. And so then there's red, far red cancel each other out, red, far red cancel each other out. So these two are like you never flashed. So it's just kind of interesting that we can have reversible effects of red light and that flash, the reversible effects of red and far light on the photoperiod of plants. All right, so I just wanted to show you and relate that photoperiods can be with animals, but they also can be with plants. All right, shifting seasons. So again, we're talking about migration cues. As the seasons change, temperature and precipitation often also change. Many places have distinct wet and dry seasons. This can cue animal that it's time to migrate. So if it's dry, it'll trigger them to migrate and maybe to areas where they will find more water. So if we turn the page here, that leads right into food and water availability. So the lack of food and or water due to either extreme temperatures, less precipitation, if there's overcrowding. So there's a lot of individuals in the same area competing and so on. There might not be enough food or water, and will spur some animals to move. So so individuals can react and act on information and also communicate to one another. So different animals have really good communication skills. So in behavioral ecology, a signal is a behavior that causes a change in another animal's behavior. So then they communicate. So communication is the transmission and reception of signals. So they transmit it and communicate. One animal communicates to another, and the other one receives that, interprets it, and so on. So let's look at some forms of animal communication. Animals communicate using, there's visual, chemical, tactile, electrical, and auditory signals. So let's go through an example of the fruit fly courtship that shows some of these things. So a male identifies a female of the same species and orients towards her. What he does next is called chemical communication. He smells a female's chemicals in the air to confirm her identity. This is like they're called pheromones. So she releases and has certain chemicals that she released. They go into the air, and he senses that. So he smells these chemicals and therefore knows she's there. All right. So remember, he identifies a female. So that's how one way to identify. Also, another one is visual communication. He sees the female and orients his body towards her. All right. So that's this picture right here. All right. So this little cloud around here. So this is the female. Here's the male. All right. So he smells the chemical. That's a little cloud around her, the pheromone. And he sees her and orients his body towards her. All right. Then he alerts her to his presence, all right? And he does this by tactile communication. He touches, tactile is touching, the female with a foreleg. So he takes his leg and kind of taps her, all right? And he also produces a courtship song to inform the female of his species. And so I will tomorrow show you a video of this, but he informs her by the courtship song. So that's the auditory, all right? That's an auditory signal, all right? And then, so that's the auditory communication is next. He extends and vibrates his wings. All right, so that's what we see here. He's vibrating his wings. And if all three steps are successful, the female will allow the male to mate with her. All right, and so that's an example of a ritual, but that's also an example of communication as well between two organisms of the same species. All right, so that's one form of communication. Let's talk about honeybees. European honeybees show complex communication with a symbolic language as well. And this is really cool as well, how they can, quote unquote, talk to each other. A bee returning from the field performs a dance to communicate information about the distance and direction. So you can tell distance and direction of a food source. So a little interesting thing about bees, there's a queen bee in the colony, and she's got daughters, the workers, and there's drones, the males, and the queen actually releases a pheromone that inhibits the development of ovaries in all the other female worker bees, and then attracts the males, the drones, to the queen during her mating, and so on. So they only want to mate with her. All right. So there's this little interesting tidbit about that. So they do this dance. So a bee going out and finding food, comes back and communicates with the other bees in the hive. And so let's talk about how they communicate here. So they come back, and this is called the round dance. So they come back, and if they kind of follow the arrows here, it kind of circulates in a little circle here, almost like a figure 8. This is the round dance. And what does that mean? If the bee comes back and does that, it means that food is near. So you go out of the hive, and you don't have to go very far, and you'll find food. All right, so they're communicating with the other bees to get the nectar to come back to bring to the hive to make the honey. If the food is far away, they have to communicate how far, where is the food, in what direction, and so on. So here, let's look at here. Here's a little dance here. So here's the, this is called the Waggle Dance. All right, so it's right here, Waggle Dance. And this is food is distant. All right, it's far away. How about far away? So where is the food? All right, so first little dance. So there's different ways to do the waggle dance. And why they waggle is, so notice here the bee is going in this direction, comes around here, goes back up, comes around here, goes back up, comes around here, goes back up, comes around here. So, all right, so that's how it does. Down the center, it waggles its little behind, all right? So it waggles its behind when it does the dance. So when this dance goes upwards, all right, like this, okay, the food, let's put here, what they're telling them is the food is in the same direction as the sun. Right here. All right, so here, when they come out of their hive and look around here, same direction as the sun, all right, and notice it's straight up vertical, so it's at a 90-degree angle from the vertical part of the beehive. So therefore, from the beehive, all right, in the same direction of the sun, straight up means 90 degrees. So therefore, location A, dance A. All right, go together. So it's telling them to come out. It's in the direction of the sun, going straight up, no angle. You're going straight towards the sun. All right, let's call this B. So here, notice it's the same dance. The bee is going down and coming around like this, down and going up, and coming around, all right? And so on and so forth. So that's the only thing different is it's going down and waggling down. And so so now we could say the food is this is in the same direction of the sun. This is now in the opposite direction. So that would be where? That would be here, location B. Come out, find the sun. It's 90 degrees, so we're going 9 degrees to the vertical of the sun here. All right, so 90 degrees in the opposite direction. All right, and therefore, that's where they're going to fly, and they're going to look for food. And then lastly, we're going to call this C. Notice here that instead of going straight up, it's going at an angle. So he's going up and around, but at that angle. And so what does that mean? The food is, and this is, so if we look at this straight up and down, 90 degrees, this is about 30 degrees. The food is 30 degrees to the right of the sun. So where is that on our diagram? They come out, find the sun, and it's going up, so it's in the direction of the sun, so going towards the sun, but not going straight up, 30 degrees to the right, so they're going to fly that way and look for their food in that way. All right, and so they will do these dances to communicate. And also something else that's interesting is that the distance, like how far is indicated by the number of waggles. So the more waggles, the farther the bee knows that they're going to have to fly to find the food. All right. And so it's communicating to its hive mates in which direction and how far they must fly to reach the food source. So it's a pretty good way, cool way of communication. And again, I have a little video clip to show you that also tomorrow. So, a lot of animals, I've already talked about this, communicate through these chemical signals, and I talked just a minute about the queen bee. These chemicals are called pheromones. These are helpful in communication. I talked about it in the mating ritual of the fruit flies, the queen bee, and another example, a female moth can attract a male moth several kilometers away. It always amazes me, so far away they can do that. A honeybee queen produces a pheromone that affects the development and behavior of female workers and male drones. And then another thing, this is kind of like involved in a fright response when a minnow or catfish is injured. An alarm signal in the fish's skin disperses in the water when they're afraid of something and induces a fright response among fish in the area. And so therefore the fish know that there's something dangerous, like a predator or something in the area. And so that's what this picture here is showing you here. Here's a bunch of fish swimming around. They're all A-okay. There's no predators. There's no fright signal. Here is a little dropper where a scientist manually put in that chemical, and so the chemical that is normally exuded from the skin, they manually put it in, and now look at the behavior of the fish. They're all hunkered down as if there is an alarming predator or something like that, that there's danger, even though there's no danger, showing that when that chemical is released, it's communicating with the other organisms in their population. So behavior, as we've learned, like with courtship rituals and so on, influences reproductive success, and therefore if these behaviors, which can have a genetic basis, can be passed on and so on. So living systems have a variety of signal behaviors or cues that produce changes in the behavior of other organisms and can result in differential reproductive success. So we just talked about that with evolution. So organisms that have those traits will be able to mate and pass those traits on. So an example is territory marking. So an example, the smell of urine now may not strike people as pleasant, but female mice find it as attractive as cologne. Researchers have confirmed that male house mice that excel at scent marking their territory also have more offspring. So they are able to mate more and have more offspring. And I think that this is because the mouse females are able to infer their mate quality from the scent mark deposits. So they think that if a mouse has something wrong with it, if it's subordinate or sick, for example, their scent marks become less conspicuous and less attractive to female mice. So therefore, a nice, strong, great marking of the scent deposits indicates a good, strong mate, and therefore the females will mate with those particular mice. We've talked already about courtship and mating behaviors. So in intersexual selection, members of one sex choose mates on the basis of certain traits. So that's what we've talked about so far. So the females may be looking for specific traits in their mates, and we talked about how that's why most of the time males have a greater coloration and so on, because it's advantageous to an advantageous trait to draw mates toward themselves. So that's what we've spent a lot of time talking about that, but there's also intra-sexual selection, and this involves competition between members of the same sex for mates. So this would be like two males fighting for a mate. And so there's a lot of competition that way. All right, and then the next section, we're going to take a look at learning. So some behaviors are genetic and some behaviors are learned, you're taught. So I'm going to write here innate behavior is behavior that's inherited, and so that you get through genetics. And so we know this in humans. You can study twins because they're the only ones that have identical DNA. Twins that you look at allow researchers to compare the influences of genetics as well as the environment. And remember, we talked about twins being separated at birth, and so their genetics are identical, but their environments are different, and we can look at that. Animal studies are done as well. A cross-fostering study can explain a lot as well. This takes the young from one species and lets them be cared by adults from another species. So then you can see what behaviors they still have, even though they're being quote unquote raised by a different species. So you can learn which traits and behaviors are due to genetics and which behaviors are actually taught. All right. So when behaviors are taught, we learn that that is called learning. So learning is the modification of behavior based upon specific experiences. You can learn from that. So research into learning seeks to understand the contributions of both nature and nurture. So who is raising and the genetics, all right? And so looking at the environment versus genetics. So one type of behavior is called imprinting. And so imprinting is the establishment of a long-lasting behavioral response to a particular individual or object.